Okay. So why is spelling difficult for kids? It's not only difficult for kids, it's difficult for a lot of adults. And, if I'm like at a party with just, my regular friends, not my reading friends, people will ask me, oh, what do you do? And then they start asking me questions about why English is so crazy. And then I have to tell them that it's not, that just nobody explained to them how English works. There are irregularities in our language that make it, a little bit more challenging, but there's a way that we can teach kids to, so that they really understand the meaning behind the orthography, right? The orthography is the spelling of our language. And if you understand that, then it takes a huge burden off of you. And then if those words are sorted in a way that makes it easier for you to understand, that makes a huge difference too. So we're going to talk about some ways that we can improve our spelling instruction to help our kids do a little bit better. Okay, so just a little bit about what I do. My name is Jennifer Hasser. I started a reading center called Syllables, and we are still around 23 years later. We do one-on-one teletherapy. We're accredited by MSLEC and the International Dyslexia Association. So we also do assessments. So we try to do low cost assessments that aren't, full psychologicals, but oftentimes people wait a little bit too long to get their kids tested because it's so expensive. So we do what we call low cost screening so that we can let parents know what's going on before it's too late, and maybe refer them on for full psychological or at least get intervention started earlier. So that's what we do at Syllables. At Kendore, that is our training and material side. We have been training teachers since 2002, and our program, we can certify teachers in structured literacy. So we also do just professional development for multiple range of topics. We actually have one next week on morphology in the lower grades, and then we start our Kendore Learning, Kendore Kingdom Part 1, which is a comprehensive reading and spelling, fluency, all of it, program for either remediation or lower grades. So feel free to check that stuff out if you are interested. Um, now let's start talking about spelling. So there are some warning signs. The warning signs for being a poor speller are virtually the same as being a poor reader, right? So if we are seeing kids not have an appreciation of rhymes, they don't want to listen to them, they don't make them up. My nephew walked around all the time going, door, poor, lore, more. At like 3 years old, and I was like, wow, he's going to be a great reader. Um, you know, are we seeing them like pull out the wrong words frequently? I remember I have a daughter with dyslexia, and when she was little, she said, tornado Katrina instead of hurricane Katrina. And she would say, put my window up, but it was up and she meant down. So she would pull out words that are similar, but not the word that she intended to. So you'll see a lot of that in those preschool years, mispronounced words. Now, all kids do all of these things. So, we don't want to, think everyone's going to have an issue, but it's really, is it going on for longer than it is for everybody else? You know, People always said, don't compare kids, and that's not fair. And, I have twins. Of course, I was comparing them. And one of them was, could do rhymes, wasn't having those retrieval issues, and the other one wasn't. So I knew really early that most likely we had, dyslexia coming right around the corner, but we're still, in those preschool years. Once you get to kindergarten, you will start to see that they're having real trouble, associating a sound with a letter name, just saying that B says B, really understanding that things to be pulled apart. Like lots of kids say like elemento when they're saying the ABCs, but they start to not realize that these are words within a sentence. They just kind of, chunk them all together. And then even those words, they can't pull apart those word parts, right? Um, if they're starting to learn to read in first grade and they really can't even read common one syllable words, or they forget what the word was. They just sounded it out. They blended it. They turned the page, and all over again they are sounding it out. Just that, leaving their memory that quickly is usually a sign that some reading and spelling things are right around the corner. So, because we know that if they're showing some of these signs that, um, your average reader and speller may only need to see words, a handful of times. Um, whereas a student that's going to struggle, we see misspellings of words that they've seen 100,000 times, right? And you're like, how can this be where you have seen this word so many times over and over and over and over again, and you still are not retaining what it looks like? We may have to go deeper than just exposure. We're going to have to teach them more about the language than just, what a word, looks like. And also, if there's a history of reading or spelling problems in your family. So when I was young, there wasn't a lot of dyslexia diagnosis going on, and when my parents were young, there definitely wasn't. But it's pretty easy to see, even if I look back at letters from family members, that we probably had some dyslexia and attention going on in our family going pretty far back. Um, so it's just looking at, and oftentimes that spelling is going to tell you, um, how good their reading is, because reading and spelling are just, kind of two sides of the same coin, with reading obviously being easier because the words stay in front of you. You can look at them, you can spend time sounding them out. Whereas spelling has to come from your head, from the ether, right? You have a sentence you want to write, and you have to try to think about it, and create those letters and figure out those patterns in your head, right? So it is much more difficult than decoding. So poor spellers may be missing some of these things: phonological awareness, the ability to remember what they've learned, vocabulary, morphological awareness, and finally good instruction, right? So oftentimes good instruction makes the most difference, right? So what is phonological awareness? And this is just, a short kind of overview, but it's the ability to hear and discriminate sounds, right? It's the ability to, um, be able to hear the sounds within the words, to hear the difference between, the subtleties of words. Like my last name is Hasser. Over the phone, I have to say H-A, two S's like Sam, E-R, because I'll often have my name spelled with two F's because those sound so similar, and they're really one sound away in your mouth. So, you know, that's why I know that I need to spell that out. That's why we also have like the military alphabet, with, they'll say Charlie for C, because if you say C, it can sound like a lot of other things if it's next to another word, right? So that's really for phonological reasons why that occurs, because no one wants to mishear coordinates while you're in the middle of a war, right? So I'm sure probably something bad happened, and someone said, "Okay, we need to come up with a better way to communicate these letters." So when we think about phonological awareness, it's how individual sounds come together to form speech, to form words, um, and uh, and that is going to impact our spelling dramatically, right? Uh, it also includes stress and rhythm and rhyme. So, when we talk about stress, there's a lot of spelling issues going on with schwa, right? There's unaccented syllables. What letter do I choose? For kids, that can be a difficult thing to work through, right? So, what does memory have to do with spelling? Well, your auditory memory is one of the biggest predictors of reading success, right? So when usually a kid is tested for having a reading issue, they will test your short-term auditory memory. And that could be called phonological memory. It could be called short-term memory. There's a lot of different names, for it depending on the test that's being used. But it's basically your ability to hold information in your short-term memory for any length of time, right? For reading, you would see that, kids who are trying to sound something out, I always use the example, like if they go act, and then butterfly. It means that they've been able to sound out those sounds, but when it came time to hold all three at once and blend them together, they just guessed because that was just going to be too hard for them to hold on to. So if it's too hard to hold on to when you're looking at the letters, imagine if you want to spell bat and you have to listen for the sounds, pull them apart, hear them each individually, and then remember what letter goes with it. Right. So, if decoding is hard, right, the reading part, then encoding is going to be even more difficult. So we have to know that these things are going on, because if we know that there is a memory issue, and there's lots of different types of memory, by the way. So, some kids do better, in different areas as far as memory is concerned. So don't, when I say there's a memory issue, oftentimes parents will say to me, oh, but they remember every single name of every Pokemon, or they remember all the baseball stats. Every football player that's ever played for, whatever team. But that's when they have an interest in something, right? So this isn't, when we think about spelling, we have to have the memory for these, invented shapes that, someone a long time ago decided should represent the sounds of our language. So that's a little bit harder for a lot of kids because it is abstract. Okay. Um, Now, the orthographic memory is your ability to map words into your long-term memory. Good spellers, I sometimes say good spellers are born, right? They don't even know why other people can't spell. They think that they're lazy and not paying attention, but, you know, they couldn't explain to you why. I mean, I was that way when I first started learning about learning disabilities. I was like, how do I know how to spell all these words? How do I know that that is an OR and not an ER at the end of that word? I mean, I had no idea. I just knew. And when I went to write it, I just wrote it correctly. So, I was kind of blessed with a good orthographic memory. Now, of course, your orthographic memory starts to get holes in it when you start working with kids who can't spell, because you start looking at the words and think, that kind of looks right. You've seen it misspelled so many times. So, but your orthographic memory, you might have noticed if you wrote a word down and you look at it and you go, that doesn't look right. I think I need two C's. Then that means you're not really thinking about how to spell it or why it's spelled that way. You're just saying it doesn't look right and I need to add that other letter. And so, what will happen is that we can, as teachers, help kids to develop a better orthographic memory, right? So we can do different things to help them get these words mapped into their long-term memory, because after a while we want it to become more natural, not where they have to think of every sound every time they turn around and write a word. And we also don't want them to have to choose which words to use because they can't remember what they were, writing, or that they can't remember how to spell the particular word they wanted. So then they have to switch to an easier word. Because when that happens, especially kids with memory issues, they forget the rest of the sentence, right? They forget what they were saying. And then they hate to write because they can't get the ideas they want down on paper. They have to choose, easier things, right? Attention and executive functioning cross over into this because, if you've got executive functioning difficulties or attention issues, uh, it may be hard to plan out what you're going to write, plan out what you're going to spell, think about the beginning and the middle and the end, and execute. So, knowing what could be impeding these issues for kids who are really struggling is going to be super important. But if we're just looking at your average speller, just taking some of these things that we're going to talk about tonight into, putting them into effect will raise everybody's spelling ability or shorten the time with which they need to learn those. And then they can be getting moved on to more difficult items, right? And that would be great. And we're not spending tons and tons of time on the same words over and over again. Okay, so how does vocabulary and morphological awareness impact spelling? So your oral language will help, you to determine word structure, like your syntax and semantics. Like, is it a noun? Is it a verb? So if you learn past tense and it's past tense, then you're going to have to add that to the word and whatever spelling it might be, right? So the more words you know and the more you understand about, the language, even orally, that is going to improve your ability to transfer that information to a code. Right? So oral language is really, it's really important for kids to have as much in their oral vocabulary as possible. Um, it just makes it easier to connect those oral patterns to new words, right? If they know invisible and then divisible, dirigible, they kind of know orally what this pattern is. And if they know how to spell one of those words, then they can start to transfer those to new words. So having, a bigger oral vocabulary is going to make a big difference. But then also, knowing the meaning helps to pair the spelling. So if you know that there's multiple spellings, if I know what those different words mean, then I can pick the right one. And that makes a big difference. Okay. So what does poor spelling instruction look like? Random word lists to memorize, 20 words a week that really have no clear-cut reason, rhyme or reason to them. Sometimes they're pulled from a story that they're reading. Um, it just sometimes they'll say they're grade level appropriate. I don't even know what that means. But then we're saying, okay, we want you to just go home and memorize them. And we've known this for a while that it does not transfer. Kids can memorize words for a test on Friday and then misspell them in their writing on Monday. That we see a lack of transfer when we do it this way because it's just memorized for the test and then it's forgotten because there's nothing for them to anchor to, right? They don't have meaning, anchor to it. It's just this randomized word list. List based on a rule of the week. So a rule of the week is better than no rule of the week. But what I see happening for kids for spelling instruction is that they'll do a rule each week, but then they don't cumulatively review these rules. They don't include the different rules as they go. They think, well, okay, we did this rule. They spelled them all on Friday based on the rule. And then we moved on to the next one. And then the next year, the teachers are like, oh, we need to teach that rule again. They don't know how to do it. And why didn't last year teach it? So it has to be more cumulative over time so that you're constantly going back and talking about there's some very common rules that everyone should know and they should be talked about all the time because you're going to need them for the rest of your life, right? Lists based on multiple spellings of the same sound at the same time. Sometimes people will say, oh, this is a phonics based test. I'm like, every test is a phonics-based test if it's spelling test, because it's all phonics. It's a sound paired with a symbol. But when you do multiple spellings at the same time, I've seen like go, no, like the KNOWNNO, toe, like I stubbed my toe, tow, like I'm going to tow a boat, right? All of these are on the same test. And I've even seen like though on there as well. There's no way that that is actually reinforcing a sound pattern because you're going to have to just memorize which one is which. Right? It's not giving you the opportunity to be able to figure out when, where, and why we use a particular spelling in English, um, because there really is an ability to take a lot of these commonly confused, words and teach them in a way that kids can hold on to them, right? So, and also when we focus on reading over spelling, people will say, well, we have to get them reading. And I'm like, reading and spelling is the same thing. If we're not asking them to, dictate all these words we're teaching them to read, then we're losing out on an opportunity to cement it, because if you can spell a word, you can read a word, right? So, but it does not work in reverse, right? So I often use the example of the word hors d'oeuvre. I can read the word hors d'oeuvre, but if I was writing a note, hey, come over for hors d'oeuvres, I might substitute hors d'oeuvre for snacks because I haven't memorized really the word hors d'oeuvre. So I would choose one that would be easier to spell, even though I can read it. Right? So just because you can read a word doesn't mean you can spell it. But if you can spell a word, you can read it. So spending time on spelling automatically improves reading. And so it's just a win-win, right? There's no reason why we wouldn't want to make sure that we're doing spelling as often as we are doing decoding practice, reading practice. Okay, what should we do to improve spelling? Well, we need to include these in every lesson. Phonology, which is, the sounds and everything that goes around the sounds. I'm going to talk about a couple things that are hardly ever mentioned when it comes to spelling instruction in the next few minutes. Morphology, which is the meaning of what we're writing. Etymology is the history of the language. So if you're teaching words, so I actually met with teachers in a school 2 days ago who were teaching GN, the silent letters, pair, GN. And I said, well, what words did you use? Because there's really only like 4 or 5. There's gnaw and gnarl and gnat, right? And gnash, like gnash your teeth. And they're like, yeah. And I said, well, why would we spend that much time teaching them that GN is a silent letter pair when there's not that many words? And I said, did you explain to the kids what it meant? And they just looked at me like they didn't know it meant something, and it means to chew, right? So if you're going to gnash your teeth, and if you're something's all gnarled up, it's all chewed up, and a gnat will bite you. So basically, that's where that came from. If you're thinking about GN like gnome, that actually is a different GN, and it's going to be the GN from nos, right? Like all knowing, like agnostic. So knowing that it comes from Old English is going to tell you that it's probably short words, not very many of them, and it's going to have a meaning, right? But also chew, a short word, as the definition. So then if you have of another language of origin, you're going to have different words, different meanings, and they're going to come in different parts of the word. So being able to explain these things to kids, it's going to help them a lot to figure out what those words mean. Right? So it's never going to be 100%. You're not going to be able to teach them every single thing about everything, but at least diving in and giving them, a good head start on understanding that our spelling comes from somewhere and there is some rhyme and reason is going to help them a ton. And then kind of teaching them that phoneme grapheme correspondence to analyze what part of the word means what, and what is the base, and are there prefixes and suffixes, and talking about all of these things together is really important. So it's not just here are the letters, spell them, and write them 10 times, right? Because then we're not really learning them with depth, right? So this is how I like to talk about getting everything into kids' brains, is that one, we need to repeat things often, right? So repeat, 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 repeat. And sometimes we repeat things that aren't very valuable. So think about the rules that you're teaching and say, is this really valuable? Is this going to be helpful? And what I'm teaching them, is it even true? Like stop and think for a second and say, is this the way this should be taught? Does this sound the way I'm saying it? Start to question some of the things that maybe you've been doing for a while, or even that, you see other teachers doing. Do expressive activities. So like as you're spelling and talking about all of this, that you're doing it out loud. So, the first thing I do with kids is when I teach them something, I say, here's the rule. I just did this yesterday. We were doing CK, at the end of a 1-syllable word. So how would you spell back? And they're like, BACK. And then I say, why? Because maybe they already knew how to spell back. I want to know, why do they need that C in that word? Without the C, it would spell back. But if I added ing, then it would become baking, right? I need that C to protect the vowel from a vowel suffix. So these are the things that I need the kids to start knowing, because that one rule of protecting a vowel is our CK rule, our TCH rule, our DGE rule, our doubling rules. So it's the exact same rule. It's just done in a different, with different letters. So we can start to say, look how we have to do this to protect our vowels. And here are all the rules and where that happens. And then get them to explain it to you. Make sure they have ability to, talk to each other, talk to you, because if the teacher's doing the talking all the time, the teacher already knows everything they're teaching. The kids need that expressive practice to be able to cement it. Because if you can explain it, then you understand it, right? So allow for success. Pick something that kids can be successful at. Start with that first, because if they feel successful and like, oh wow, look at this. I just learned what GN meant, and and they know that it has a meaning, and they're like, wow, this is pretty cool. I wonder if KN means something, right? You're starting to get them to um, feel better about the activity, because a lot of kids are like, I hate spelling. Spelling makes no sense. But as soon as they can start to feel successful, it's going to increase their attention, and it's going to keep them. I mean, if they're hoping it's over, then you're not getting their attention, right? And if they're having a good time and they're learning, then they're going to be, a lot more willing to do work for you. Chunk information. So semantic and associative encoding, we know that the brain learns best that way, which that means that if we have something that's related in meaning and we can all teach it together, and if I said, let's, for example, I was going to teach cept, CEPT, which is like to take or hold. If I'm teaching a middle school class, we might talk about, oh, did you see that interception? I might even show a video of a football game and the interception. What happened there? They'll tell me, oh, he got in between the receiver and the quarterback and he got the ball, and then we can say, okay, well, guess what CEP means? To take or receive, right? To hold. And enter, he got between. So the receiver wasn't allowed to get it, right? So it was intercepted. That was an interception. And then you can bring in the words that they don't necessarily know, right? Like reception, um, deception, and talk about how those are all related, because now you've taken something that they knew semantically, right? And then now you're going to bring all these other things and associate it with the one that they know. Most of the time we talk about this as like prior knowledge, but in all these spelling situations, you can bring in something they know and then anchor to it, right? And that makes it easier to teach them a concept. Make it hands-on, make it kinesthetic. You can have them, practice writing in sand or shaving cream or in the air, or I write on windows all the time with wonder sticks that we have. And then they're up, they're standing up, they're moving, and they're practicing spelling. So it just gives them, another way of holding on to that information. And I'm not against pen and paper, that works too, but it's good to have some kind of variety. And oftentimes I'll have them air write, where if you air write, what I like about air writing, and you always use two fingers, is that when you write, you kind of leave like this little trail in your visual memory of the letter, like almost like a sparkler. And so you can practice spelling it and seeing it in kind of that visual, whiteboard you have in your head, and getting kids to start visualizing these words. That means they're getting into that orthographic memory and that they're starting to map them. And that is a great way to save on school supplies as well, because they usually come to school, with everything they need to write in the air. Okay? So when we talk about that phonology and morphology, we can put this all together, right? So a phoneme is your ability, that single speech sound. And we talked about phonological awareness. So that's about sound. So what are the sounds we hear in words? What are the morphemes, the units of meaning? So in the word never, there is the word ever, and then the N as a negative connotation, right? So it basically means not ever, right? Are you going to do that? Never. Right? So it's nor or neither have that same morpheme, that N having that negative effect on the word, because it's like, do you want either? Nope, I want neither, right? And then what are those graphemes? How do we take the sounds that we hear and turn them into letters? And if we understand what the word means, we can hear the sounds within that word, then we're going to be able to better choose the graphemes that we use with it, right? So being able to identify all of these things makes anchoring to that spelling a lot easier. Right? We need to teach about pronunciation of words and connected speech. So I've been a little bit on a I guess, rampage. But I'm talking about it a lot lately because I keep hearing people say words in connected speech completely differently than when they're teaching them. And so in sentence stress, the way that we speak and the way that we want kids to read, um, you know, we are saying the words differently than we're teaching them. So if I read run to school, then what's happening is I'm stressing every single word. But we don't do that in English. We stress the meaning words and then we schwa the words in between, mostly our function words. So if I said run to school in connected speech, I would say run to school, run to, right? Run to, run to school, or go to the store, go to the store, right? We will, I mean, hardly ever, ever, ever say to as to in a sentence in connected speech. So when we have kids who are misspelling these or spell like what'd you know, like instead of what did you, right? What did you do? Or what do you? What do you want to do, right? What do you want? Um, we need to point out that the reason they're spelling a lot of these things the way that they're saying them is because that's what we're teaching them to do. We're saying, listen for these sounds and then translate them to spelling, but we're not explaining the fact that we never say these the same way, right? In connected speech. So the word do a lot of times will sound like d, just like t, you know, and like, what do you, right? But if I say, what do you want to do? Then I stress the do at the end, but in the middle, that do sounded nothing like the do at the end. And we don't often explain that to kids, that there's a disconnect often between what we're telling them the word says and what it will actually sound like in their head when they want to write something, um, and in speech around them, right? This also impacts their ability to decode in a fluent way as well, but especially for spelling, right? We say that kids get so confused between to, too, and two, but too sounds like two, two sounds like two, but to sounds like t the majority of the time. So you could take that one off the table, then they'd only have to be confused about the number two and too, right? And then you could teach the tw and too means two, and then it would be just a lot easier than having them be confused constantly about the same words, especially when we don't say them the way that we think that we do, right? The same thing with, this is the phonology piece. We don't tell kids about the fact that we actually align middle syllables quite frequently in English. So even though we might teach them ever and never, every is not pronounced that way. We say every, we say different, right? Family. So when they go to spell, if we're not spending time showing them why these words are spelled like this, because in the word different, diff means not, so it's actually a form of dis. FER is to carry, so like carry or bear. So if you're different, you don't carry the same characteristic, right? So you differ from somebody else or something else, or and so when a kid goes to spell, if we haven't taught them about the meaning of the pieces and how those pieces all need to be in there, even though we don't pronounce them, then we're going to see these kinds of spelling mistakes. So this is where the morphology is really going to come in. We could talk about never, then we could talk about ever, then we, you know, and we could talk about every, and then we could mention the fact that when we say every, we don't say that middle syllable. So a lot of the spelling mistakes that we see are kids just spelling the way that they talk, and no one's bringing it up, you know, to them about why, um, you know, in English we drop those middle syllables. And it is because we have a stress time language and we're trying to compact what we say into the same amount of time every time. And so we'll tend to drop, especially three syllable words like interest is just interest, right? Um, and that can mess kids up for spelling. So pointing these out, practicing these, talking about how we hear it and how we spell it, because I cannot tell you how many teachers have told me my students don't hear the middle syllable. Parents will say they just don't hear the middle syllable. And it's not they don't hear the middle syllable, we don't even say the middle syllable, right? So teaching kids about that disconnect between the way that it's spelled for meaning and the way that we say it in our oral language, I think is really important. Okay? We need to teach speech production. I put / articulation um, because kids will spell tree as tree, CHREE, or dress as dress. But in your mouth, what happens is as you go from that sound to the R sound, that R sound, you pass the ch sound. So on the bottom, if you see it goes across where your tongue is moving, you'll end up kind of crossing that ch, going from the t to the r. So some people don't even say the t anymore. In certain parts of our country, they just say tree. They don't even say tree or dress. But this same phenomenon happens when you have like graduate, you say the same thing, grad, like the D in dress becomes a j sound. Or congratulations sounds a lot like a ch, or picture sounds a lot like ch. And that's because of the way we're passing sounds in our mouth. And we can easily tell young kids when you think you hear that, let's talk about why that is. Because they do hear it. They don't think they hear it. They hear it because they're passing it, right? And that is important to talk about because when we have connected speech, the air doesn't stop. It's not like we go e, right? We say tree, and then they are going to hear bits of sounds as we pass them in our mouth, and that's going to cause some confusion for spelling. But we hardly ever tell kids about this, and then we think, wow, why are they spelling tree CHREE instead of TR, right? But this is why. Not because they think a T looks like a CH at all. It's just because it is what they hear. And for ease of articulation, so in order to say things faster and easier, we'll drop certain sounds. So like in the word fasten, like fasten your seatbelts, we don't really hear the T, but it's there because otherwise it wouldn't have the same meaning, right? Oft, we don't really say oft very often anymore, but it used to be a word that was used quite frequently, or oft, as they say. um, but if we know that this occurs, we can show them, look, there's that en suffix, so we know that t has to be there. Because if you say it, he often goes there, often, then they're going to think that there is only an F. So you can pull these words together and say, let's look at these. What is the base of these words? Even though we don't hear that sound, we need to make sure that it's in our spelling. So we can chunk our words into smaller groups where these things are going to happen. Because like in the word whistle, I'm sure no one's really using the word thistle, but close enough. And lastly, they use quite frequently. Okay, so homophones and silent letters. We have, WR, which means to twist. If we teach them that, then we can easily show them the difference between spelling a ring, where I'm going to ring something out, and a ring on your finger. That those would have different meanings, therefore different spellings. Write and write, if I'm going to write with my wrist versus something being correct. And this way, they'll know which spelling they're going to use. I mean, my high school kids all wanted to be rappers. I think it was RAP, not WRAP, because I think there's a big difference in fame and pay if you're a rapper at for the holidays, Christmas rapper versus I guess a regular rapper. KN to mean it has more to do with the shape, which is this like blunt end kind of your knuckle, and to knock. what is the difference here between these words and how we would spell them has a lot to do with the meaning, right? KN as in to know. It comes from nos, that GNOS, but know, new, knows, knowledge. If we're talking about homophones, these words mean totally different things based on the way that they're spelled. So we can point these out, then the kids can learn spelling in chunks. They'll have phonology, they'll have morphology, right? We'll be talking about the phonemes and the graphemes. So we've kind of got the whole thing kind of bundled into one. And this means there's less of a burden on memory, because even if we're just doing not and need and night and naughty for these words, they might think about it when they think about knuckle, right? And to knock on the door, and a doorknob, that they all have those same shape. So there's just different ways to chunk words so that we're making sure that we're hitting all of these kind of target areas. Breaking up words to show, where the prefixes, the base, and the suffixes are, is super helpful. The word misspell is one of the most commonly misspelled words, which I think is kind of ironic. But if you have miss, which means, not, right? And then you have spell, you're going to have two S's, because otherwise it would be my spell or misspell, right? And then the meaning wouldn't be there. We need to keep the meaning of the prefix and we need to keep the meaning of the base, right? So a lot of our double letters are like this. If you look at like immortal, we need to have two M's because it means, not to be able to be killed. Mort is death. Unneeded, if we only had one N, it would completely change the meaning. So a lot of times these double letters really get kids kind of mixed up because they try to memorize everything. Is there one N or two? Are there two C's or two S's? And they can't remember hundreds of thousands of words. But if they understand that each one of those double letters is going to be needed for meaning, so that we know what those words mean, then it's going to help guide them into how to spell, right? So it really is super valuable to be able to see these pieces to keep kids from making all of these types of errors. Okay. Whether they can read or not, it's good to start talking about the bases and the affixes and what you hear. So if you're running, what does that mean? Right? Because if kids understand this, when I said earlier, kids with good morphological awareness, they are going to be better spellers, right? I had one of my daughters when she was really young. She was talking about her pop-up, my dad. He had cancer, but she said he had an itis. And I was like, well, good morphological awareness. Like she was like 5 years old and she's like, yep, my pop has an itis. And I was like, that's so funny because it's like you hear on TV like gingivitis and arthritis and bronchitis. And, apparently it's not good to have an itis. And the fact that she knew he wasn't well and then she pulled out itis was, made me feel like, oh, okay, we're going to have a pretty good vocabulary here. If we're making that transfer already at 5 years old. So, that they start to know when you say things that, what they mean. But then, we will accent usually, especially in a two-syllable word, the base, the meaning part. So if you talk about the meaning part, and then say, well, if we turn, we return, we're returning, what do these all mean? You're going to start building that capacity for spelling even before they really need to. And little kids understand a lot of this stuff more than a lot of people think. Okay. And then teach why we need the spellings, right? I keep saying that over and over again, but if I have please versus please, and I say, you hear my pleas, for, I don't know, freedom or something. I don't know, whatever you plea for my life. And then please, used in a different context, it's not going to be plural. So maybe we need to spell it differently, right? It could be plural, it could be a verb, and with an S, but then you add that E and it's going to completely change the meaning of those words. And that's important for kids to know why they're using these things. Because if they're using them, then and they know why, then they'll transfer it to other words. Like if you have house and you only put an S, it looks like more than one how, right? But that wouldn't work. So, and I need to add the E onto the end of that so people knew what I was talking about, right? Because our spelling is designed to retain our meaning so that people know what we're trying to say. And that's the biggest thing behind spelling. It's sound and meaning, right? We were talking, we decided one day we needed to figure out how to write it down so we could remember. And so all of these rules are really designed to retain meaning. If we just spelled phonetically, people would have a hard time trying to figure out what it was really that we were trying to say, because a lot of things would be spelled exactly the same way and we would have no indication of, noun, verb, present, past, plural, all of that. Okay. So if you want to learn more, we're having a class next week on morphology for the lower grades and how to integrate this into the lower grades. We have a wordplay coming up and our Kendore Kingdom coming up. So if you want to join us, that would be lovely. Love to have you. Thanks for coming. And now I will answer questions. So let me check and see what questions we have. Okay. Okay. So how do we talk about words where the middle syllable is stressed? If the middle syllable is stressed, then you really don't have a problem, right? Because the example you gave me was demonic. Um, that one's almost completely phonetic. A kid would be able to spell it. But if you'd already taught them like ick word, like ick as a suffix, and they wanted to spell demonic, this is about spelling, right? So if a kid doesn't know the word demonic, he's probably not going to try to spell it. But if he's already learned ick as a suffix and he knows that it's like having the characteristics of a demon, then that would be easy. So we don't need to spend that much time on words where the syllable is stressed. Okay. But we need to tell them when it's not, that we're going to lose that whole middle syllable, because there's no way to spell without that. Okay. Someone asked me why I use two fingers for air writing, because when I mostly do these in, kids, I need to be able to see. When they use one, it's a fine motor task and they do this. They're like, and I can't tell what they're doing. But if they were to do it like this, then I can see if they are, and it makes it more of a gross motor task to use two. And I'll ask them to hold their arms out like this and then use the two fingers. So then I can see, the general shape of all the letters as we're doing it together. So that's why I use two fingers. Okay. Where would we find why night starts with KN? A lot of times it doesn't tell me things like this. Yeah, that's a good question. I teach all of them my wordplay class. I actually teach them all in my part one class, but it's just been finding them over the years and making word lists and uh, looking for commonalities and then trying to dig it all up. Yeah, I wish there was like a book with all of it, because then I wouldn't have had to learn all these things. Okay. Any tips for a 2E kid who's now 12? Well, all these things would be, and 2E is twice exceptional. So my daughter was twice exceptional. She was gifted and dyslexic. Um, especially the really bright kids love learning all this stuff. Like they would love learning about demon and demonic, and then pandemonium, where basically all heck breaks loose because all those demons come out. They really enjoy it, talking about the meanings, and they think of them as fun facts and cool tidbits, but they're really just the structure of our language. So a lot of the morphology would really benefit a 12-year-old. Middle schoolers, I mean, that's honestly the easiest group I've ever worked with for doing this stuff, because they're still like not cool enough to not like doing it. Or at least with me. So and little kids, it's super easy. Okay. How about an explanation for when they leave off the E in CE? Well, if you have a word like prince, without the E, that really says prink. You need the E to make it sound like right? So if you have them read it the way that they wrote it, then there's obviously something missing. I mean, I'll do that with kids all the time. Like they'll say, I got a puzzle for Christmas, but they forgot a Z. And I'll say, oh, you got a puzzle? What's a puzzle? Because without that other Z, they didn't protect the vowel. And so that first syllable is going to, say its name. So you're kind of showing them this is why we use the things that we do. It tends to be more if they spell prince with an SE, then you can talk about other words that have that in it, like a principal of a school, right? Or a principality. Those are going to be words that are similar in meaning because, they have to do with, the top. So then they'll see the difference. And also princess, right? Like if you have a prince and then you have princes and then you have a princess, you just keep adding another sound to change, the meaning of those words. And that helps a lot too, to see the relationship so that they're not just memorizing one word at a time. Okay. Um, can I discuss how I would break up the word family in terms of the base word? Well, if you got like family and familiar, right? And you start to look at that FAMIL, um, you'll start to see that these are all related to one another. And that will help. And sometimes you just say, like, this is how we spell it. And if we say it slowly, family, and map it out and then say, but in connected speech, we say it differently, the same way you would do a TO, right? So how would I spell that? But pulling all the other pieces of a word family together is amazing for getting kids to realize why these pieces need to be there. Because if we take them out, like if I just say every, it doesn't mean the same. If I spelled it EVRY, it doesn't mean the same thing as every. So you want to make sure that all those pieces are in there, and then you're explaining to them. It's so other people can understand what it is that you're writing, and what that base word is. Um, okay, so there are some good books that I recommend. I can send them to you. I On my website, I sell Sue Hegland's book, which is really good for giving you some ideas about that. Beneath the Surface of Words. Also, Gail Venable's book, Back Pocket Words, is on our website, which I think is really good. So there's a couple different places. Etym Online teaches you the etymology, but not sometimes the morphology, because it's not morphology online. So it doesn't necessarily break the word down into all the parts. It tells you where it comes from and what its, history is. But it doesn't break it into all the morphemes. Um, Most of the time, honestly. I think he's actually working on that, but okay. Is there hierarchy for teaching schwa? I have a webinar called all about schwa or something on I forget what I named it. It's all about schwa. And it's saved on my YouTube channel. And so that's Kendore Syllables, because Kendore, the training side, and Syllables, the tutoring side. And you can find that. And I put it in there because there is a way to teach stress, and you need to teach sentence stress. That's why the two is a problem, because it says t and the and So we tend to teach, this word says a and the, but the majority of the time it's going to be and the, right? Because they're function words. So you teach sentence stress, and the difference between, we tend to stress our nouns and verbs and adverbs, but it's all laid out in there. The best way, I think, to teach it. And I just did that one, I don't know, like a couple months ago. Okay. Is there hierarchy? Yeah. Okay. That's the same thing. Same thing. I would go through that webinar for ideas to do more with schwa, but schwa impacts our spelling a lot. And if we don't know what the pieces of the word mean, then schwa can really screw us up. Because we hear it, but we don't know how to spell it. And the only way you'll know how to spell it is if you understand what the meaning of the word is that you're, that you're teaching. Okay. What do I recommend for parents whose dyslexic kids are not receiving this kind of instruction? I'd talk to your school. And you know, give it the thing that has made me most successful in convincing people is just kind of giving them what they would consider the fun facts, and then they're like, oh, I want to learn more about that. You could say something like, when do you teach that WR means to twist? And they'll be like, WR means to twist. And then it's better to get people interested than it is to say, um tell them to watch this webinar. And then if they get when teachers start getting interested in it and they don't feel you know attacked or pressured, the road to change is a lot faster, right? Like, someone screaming at me that I need to eat healthier is probably not going to be as effective as somebody really kind of slowly over time tells me the benefits of, especially if I'm eating a banana split while they're telling me I need to eat healthier. It probably won't go over well. So, bringing kind of their awareness to these things, I think over time, um, allows for lasting change. My daughter's dyslexic and I do this for a living, and I still had a hard time getting things into her school. So it seems that they started to kind of adopt the things I recommended every time my kid left their classroom. They did it the next year, and I was like, oh, I'm always a year behind for getting this stuff into the school. But I kind of look at it as at least it's helping everybody else as well. Um, okay, let's see what else. What other question? Um, Tips for teaching high frequency words. Um, yeah, there are a lot of ways that you can sort what people call, like, she's calling them the tricky words. I call them discovery words. Uh, there's there are sub patterns within words. So you can say, we're going to talk about, these 10 words that have UGH in them. We're going to talk about these 10 words that have this KN, right? Um, and then that way you're not just randomly inserting them all willy-nilly, that they're at least getting them kind of focused on, and then you can bring them back around and talk about them again, and talk about the meaning. And I think that is really the biggest thing. um, there really are no tricky words out there necessarily, if you know why they're doing what they're doing. Now sometimes they need them quickly, and maybe you don't have enough time to explain everything to them, like the word of. I usually just make kids memorize it, because they need it before they're probably old enough for me to talk about why it is spelled the way that it's spelled. Um, so, these are, yeah, you just have to kind of pick and choose. And I'm always about, like, what's going to get me the most bang for my buck? Like, what are the most important words? Why are they the most important words? Am I picking words the kids need to know? I want to make sure I'm not just picking words for the sake of picking words. And and it also depends on how much time I get with them. Am I gonna get a lot of time with them? Then I can, you know, and I know I'm gonna get to more, then I could be more specific. If I have a feeling I'm gonna get limited time, then I want to get in as much as I can, and then the longer I have them, I can just keep going through less frequent things. Um, okay, so someone's saying, with this morphology, it always seems so daunting and overwhelming as there's too many meanings to remember. Is there an easier route to this? And the reality is there isn't an easy route to learning things that you don't know yet. And but the sooner you jump in, the sooner you start learning, and the sooner you realize how important it is. And even though it's hard for us as adults, it is valuable for kids, right? So, like, if someone said, Jennifer, you should really start eating healthier, I might resist because it's about me. But when I start learning about it, and I have to feed my children, I would probably change faster, and put myself through, more trying to learn it. And I think in the end, what happens is that you're a more effective teacher with more knowledge. You don't have to say that's an exception, or you just need to remember it, or it's just tricky, or any of those things which kind of take our power away as educators. The more we know, I think the more powerful we are when it comes to, you know, teaching kids. Okay. Um, okay, let me go down to the kind of scrolled up backwards. Let me go this other direction and see if there's anything more. Why isn't this taught in school? Because most teachers don't know it, but I think it's, I'm hoping it's going to get, more popular. And we're spreading the word as much as we can. What if a child has a speech or a hearing disability? I think this makes this all the more important, right? So that they understand why it's being spelled that way, even though they may not be able to pronounce it, or they're having auditory discrimination issues. So to me, it makes it even more important. I mean, if you have dyslexia, which is mild, but it is based on a phonological processing issue. It is not like being, deaf or, significantly hearing impaired, but it is a disconnect between your ability to hear that sound and pair it with a symbol. So I think it's all, pretty important. Okay, let's see. How do you understand the difference in schwa and infant and ballot? Okay, so that's what I'm saying. Meaning is gonna, like, in infant, the F in infant means speech. ANT means it's a noun. IN means not. So the word infant means can't speak, is what it means. So the word infantry means the same thing. If you're in the infantry, don't speak. You're the lowest man on the totem pole. You're just the soldier. You're not supposed to be giving any orders. So that's where infant comes from, and infantry. So the more you know about words, the easier it is to spell. So that's why when you start going through these, ANT as a suffix is something that would be very helpful for kids to know, because it's going to tell you part of speech, and it's also going to help you with spelling. But also, I don't hear the same sounds in those two words, but that could be dialectical. Is there an assessment a regular ed teacher can use to determine if a student is dyslexic? Not necessarily. Depends if you want a full diagnosis or you want a screener. So a lot of states are doing screeners, but if you have, most of the schools have screeners now. So if they're coming back poor on phonological awareness or decoding, and their spelling is poor, you're probably pretty close to it, and then you can refer them on for additional testing. But you can reach out to me, my email if you want, and I can give you more information on that. Okay. So do I teach this to kids virtually? Yes. Do I have a book of all the meanings? No. But I do have curriculum and trainings and a lot of it, but not like just a complete book. Why is Ellie pronounced ol? It's an old suffix. So like ble, bull, dole, gol. The le used to be a suffix. In Old English, it's considered a dead suffix. It's not. We're not usually creating new words with it, but it meant a continuous action. So like if it's gonna drizzle, or if you're gonna cuddle, and then it also has noun meanings. But if you ladle soup out, you're ladling with a ladle. But now we just kind of call it, some people call it a final stable syllable, some people call it consonant LE, but that's why. And the reason it says ol is because L is a syllabic consonant. So, that BL would be bull, DL would be dull, and that schwa sound is in between the B and the L, not after. Right? What spelling reading curriculum would I recommend? Mine. That's a silly question. Okay. How do we help children that are already stuck in the way of spelling, how they talk? You just have to start explaining it. And start, and then you keep building on that. And they're never stuck. No one's ever stuck. We can all learn all this stuff. It's just, the sooner you get kids, you don't have to break habits. And adults, you know, we've just kind of got to start open and with an open mind and start learning one little bit at a time. I used to teach that saying was an exception 30 years ago. And now I know that it's going to be Latin after a T, like instructor and sculptor and actor. But I didn't know that then. So I did the best I could at the time. And as I learn, I just keep improving because I learn something new seriously all the time. How do we get teachers trained? Can you sponsor them? Yes. We also have a foundation and we take donations. We provide a lot of scholarships. So you can do that. I sponsored trainings for my kids' teachers, different teachers. Absolutely. And what is the difference between this method and OG? Well, OG is typically a letter first method. I'm accredited as an OG methodology, but I'm a sound first, and I believe bring in morphology in from the very beginning because little kids can understand it. So, okay. Um, okay, somebody had a question about um, getting a certificate. You can email us and we'll make sure that you get that. But if you registered, then you should get one in the mail in the next couple of days. Okay. Hello, there's some people I know in here just saying hi. I think we've got most of it. It is going to be recorded and we'll send it to you. And if you have any other additional questions, feel free to reach out and I'd be happy to discuss them with you. So thank you very much for attending and have a great night. Bye.